I always say something as you go through every stage of growth, we as leaders have to learn how to think differently, plan differently, and execute differently. And that's a constant transformation, and our businesses can't make that transformation if we're not making that transformation when we look in the mirror. We have to be different people as we go through that.
Hi everyone, this is Joshua Hoffman and Alex Gerashenko, and welcome to another episode of the Masters in Marketing Agency podcast, where we deconstruct the why and how agency owners found their success and learn a little bit more about how they help their clients. Today, I have Pat Alacqua, the CEO of Blue Magnet Partners, a firm that provides entrepreneur to enterprise programming to guide entrepreneurs, emerging leaders, and executives through challenges on the path to success. Welcome, Pat.
Welcome. Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
You as well.
Thanks for joining.
We had a great discovery call, so I'm really looking forward to this. But where I want to start with all of this is a little bit of a chronological order, because it seems like some of the things, in your career kind of led to the next thing. And the first place I want to start with is Integrate, where, you help companies with event marketing and management for trade shows and events. And the last time we spoke, you mentioned that you sold that business, but it was kind of an interesting journey that you went through. So can you walk us through a little bit of that journey?
Sure, absolutely. That was probably my first real experience at scaling and growing a business. Myself and a couple of partners started that business, and the industry segment we were in. Okay, Josh, was fairly new. It'd been around a long time. There wasn't a lot of companies in it at the time. And, there was a void, like what happens in so many situations or so many industries. There was a void that exhibitors that were going to trade shows and events needed a more personalized service, because their exhibit programs were growing. They were getting more complex. So we sort of at the right place at the right time, and came in and started that business, and we sort of went through the phases of growing from startup, right? You get an idea, you get the thing started, and you grow it. You got to figure out how to scale it and get through systems, and so we went through all that, and it was the journey for me, and we can, I guess, dive in any vertical area you want, Josh. But the journey for me with that particular business was really learning early that I had to, start figuring out what working on the business meant versus what working in it meant, right? Because we were facing a lot of growth early, and it was very much a learning experience for me. I learned a lot of things, and I've been able to apply those things in many situations as my journey continued.
I love that phrase. I think it's been brought up a few times on this call, and that makes me want to just double click into it a little bit more, because especially early on, when you do see success early, I think you do get caught working in the business. Again, like you said, not on the business. I'll give you two options, I guess. You could take it one of, what did that look like specifically for your business, or like just how would you define that, working on the business, not in the business?
I guess a great question. When you're starting up a business, right, you're wearing every single hat, right? You're selling, you're servicing, and that's how most entrepreneurs get started. And they sort of have a love for what they're doing, right? And as you grow, what working on it means is you sort of got to step back and say, okay, where do I need systems? Where do I need process? How do I replace myself? We all enjoy in starting something. We all enjoy doing it and accomplishing things ourselves in what we do, right? But when you start working on the business, you really start looking at, how do I actually replace myself, right? And what does that mean, and how do you go about doing that? And that's a big transition. It was for me, and I think it's for every entrepreneur. In moving from that doer to that manager or leader, which I think are two different things. But I think that's the biggest thing. How do I replace myself? Because when I can replace myself, all of a sudden we can handle more growth. I'm not the bottleneck anymore, because if I'm doing everything and I'm working in the business, you start growing, and you, quite frankly, you can become the bottleneck, and you got to start replacing yourself. So at its core, I think there's a lot of ways to answer that, but that's one of the core things that I see in the difference between working in versus working on.
Anytime the word process gets said on this, we throw it over to Alex, because he is definitely our process guy here. And Alex, I'm sure you have thoughts, but I actually wanted to ask you a question, which is, when did I know your focus on process is, again, one of the best I've ever seen, if not the best. When did that switch for you from you were in the business, if you remember?
Oh yeah, no, it was a plan. I had so I have whiteboards everywhere, and I have a whiteboard in front of me. And for the longest time, that it's moved with me to different places, but it's used to say no implementation, focus on project management, when I was doing everything myself. So get out of implementing, focus on making sure that it's managed properly. Then when I got fully out of implementation, or let's say 95% out of implementation, it changed from no management, focus on building machines. And so that was, okay, now I want other people to manage, and I have to move out and to build process. What you're talking about, process and systems, process first, then systems. And now my next phase is move out of building machines and go into actually focusing on strategy. Where are we going? Get other people to then do the how do we build it. So that's the current phase that I'm in, and that's always in front of me. So yeah, I have no implementation, no project management, focus on machines. And now it's focus on strategy. But to throw it back to Pat, to you, you had a successful exit from this company. And in my mind, I guess success means that you're actually able to exit without potentially an earnout. How did that exit go for you? And more importantly, how did you go about implementing processes and systems, and what else you needed to do to be able to actually exit and to leave the company in a place where it could operate on its own with the new buyer?
Great. Boy, there's a mouthful, Alex. But great. I mean, great question. Great question. Let's, as they say, peel the onion one piece at a time, or whatnot, or eat that elephant one piece at a time. And please make me dive in if I I tend to get too wordy. So, but if I don't get wordy enough, tell me.
Okay.
I guess for me, a part of it. Quick context. I grew up around business, and I think, I grew up around a family business, and I started working very early, and I had this curiosity that I didn't even know I had at the time, which was, how do things work, right? So I think that was being modeled for me in very small businesses, and just making a living, my family, But so as I had it somewhat of an instinct for it, and today I can look back and I can name it, I can say maybe what it was, but I don't know that I could have done it at the time, even when we were starting with Nth Degree at the time, and in its early years. But in going through that process, it was the big thing was. That instinct, I think, always said to me, what is my definition of success? And my definition of success, I looked at it like raising my kids, right? I want to raise them. They grow up, they're born, they grow up, they move through adolescence. We have a lot of growing pains through adolescence, right? But ultimately, the real success of my parenting is how well they operate on their own. right? Or they live on their own, right? So business, I think I always had an instinct for that. As much as I had an enjoyment of getting things done myself, I started out from the very beginning of, ultimately, I don't want this place to need me. And I think that's really important. I think everybody that starts a business, as much as you love it, you always, if you're really going to get value out of it, you really got to say, how can it operate without me, right? However all that works. That's why I relate it to most of us parents can recognize the importance of letting our kids go, right? So that's why I think that's a great analogy. So first, it was my definition of success really shifted quickly mentally to I got to replace myself. And then as I was going through it, where I was struggling with that, Alex, really struggling with that doer to manager phase. And I got there's a lot of psychological issues behind that and not systematic, right? But, as I got through that phase, I'm a thinker. I'm a very much of a process guy. So I was able to, really begin to build that foundation in the organization. Now, I was fortunate in one sense. It made it challenging in another. There were a couple of partners with me, right? And one ultimately, left the organization before we sold it, okay? And just the transition of things. And there was two of us left, and we always had that inside-outside role. So I was really able to focus on the business of the business, if you will, working on it and replace myself. And early on took less being out front with customers, et cetera. So for me, and some of us have to do that for the only one. We've got to find somebody else that works with us, right, to play some of those kind of roles. But I was fortunate I have a partner to do that. And there was a lot of alignment challenges in that, which is another whole conversation, right? But in that, if I'm answering your question, Alex, it was from the very beginning, I had this mindset, okay, of growth. We had to deal with it. We were growing fast. And how do I ultimately replace myself? Because that was always my definition of success. Quite frankly, my partner, great person, please don't take anything out of context from what I'm saying. He was a lifestyle entrepreneur, okay? So it was a lot harder because we both complemented one another so well that it was challenging in making that transition because one of us ended up having to wait for the other depending on which transition the business was making, right? So having said all that, I think there was an instinct. The process was built, okay, and it was we got to a stage where we were able to put leadership in, right? So we had to. I always say something as you go through every stage of growth. We as leaders have to learn how to think differently, plan differently, and execute differently, and that's a constant transformation. And our businesses can't make that transformation if we're not making that transformation when we look in the mirror. And there's different, we have to be different people as we go through that, right? So for us, for me, I struggled with some of those transitions, but as I made them, I was able to make sure the systems were in place, the right leadership was in place. And then I went through my struggles of letting them do the darn job, get the hell out of their way, right? So that when it came time to sell, it was for me, it was fairly easy. Nothing's easy, but it was easier when we were speaking to those private equity groups about, I'm not needed. And I didn't have any ego. Hey, I say this in all humility because I had a lot of challenges. But one of them was not an ego about, I had to look important, if you will, in the process, that I was able to position the business not only in fact, but in how we communicated to the people that wanted to buy it, that we had some very good people in there. And, I could exit, and I was able to exit fairly, right at the close of this thing, because we were operating that way for a while. I'm going to come up for air, Alex, and I hope I answered your question or make me dive deeper.
First of all, yes, you answered my question, and I appreciate you providing the additional color that comes with having a partner. I've been there, seen that. Makes things a lot more complicated, but also a lot more powerful if done well. So I appreciate you talking about that as well. I'll have more follow-up questions, but Josh, I'll throw it over to you.
No, well, don't feel like you need to come up for air. The literal note I wrote while you were typing is like, I can hear why you're in leadership. The way you talk, how you talk about things. So no, when we throw you a question, feel free to run with it. I think you give great responses. But moving again, kind of chronologically through your career, I believe you took some of what you made from Nth and bought a company that you kind of referred to as a turnaround opportunity. So can you share a little bit more about that story?
Yeah. We bought, myself and a small group of investors, we bought a youth sports academy. And this was at a time where, many of them were being built or being contemplated being built around the country. And quite frankly, my view of the world was that most people, including the one we bought, hadn't figured out the model yet, right? It was that early. And of course, most of the people had some kind of a liquidity event, and they were good business. Some of them were good. Some of them, let's say they're all good business people, but somehow they forgot the basics of business when they got into this, because I'm a firm believer you're either in a business or you got a hobby or something, right? And the love of sports, I saw a lot of people get into this, and quite frankly, many of them were not successful. So when we got in, this particular business was probably burning about $600,000 a year. As I look back on it, quite frankly, I should have shut it down and then reopened it. All right. Ultimately, I did not plan on operating that myself, but quite frankly, we had to figure out the model, and we weren't moving fast enough. So I did what I didn't necessarily intend on doing, and have to get in, be a little more hands-on. So as in any turnaround, you do the best you can to think about what you got to do, but you sort of act, and then you take action, and then the pivots will reveal themselves as you go along, right? And so we were able to successfully turn it around. We created a brand around that business, it was a small business, but we got some national recognition for the business in light of around the brand, in light of our success. We like in any business, we brought in some of the right resources. We brought in and were able to develop a young management team for that scale of a business, and completely turned the model around and changed the whole model, and ultimately turned that business over to the management team, and we got our investors out. There was one that stayed in it with the management team, and I exited the business. But it was be careful. You always want the keys to your own gym. Be careful what you ask for. You just might get it. That was sort of what I always said. I had a lot of fun. I met a lot of great people in that industry, Josh, and it created a lot of relationships. And I've done some other things in the sports space and have some great relationships there. And but it was working on the business from the beginning for me in that one, because it was such a turnaround, and it was a lot of fun, but it was also a lot of pain, more pain than quite frankly I wanted. But it was, I'm glad I went through it, because it was another learning experience, and that's what all these opportunities are for me right now. I'm a lifelong learner.
Well, that's kind of where I wanted to go with my next question, and just what you learned. So now you have these two businesses. You actually exited, it sounds like, both of them. What was similar between the businesses? What was different? Like, what could you bring from the first to the second? Just kind of all around that.
Well, the interesting thing about I'll come at it in two ways on what was different, what was the same. Coming out of the trade show and event business, it was very complex business from what we did in that business. So it was a lot of staffing, a lot of labor in that trade show business. We must have had, I won't even come close to exaggerating, maybe 80 union contracts around the country that we had to manage. It was very labor intensive in our niche. Okay. And of course we were putting on events, very similar to sports business. You have teams, but on the business side, you have live events and all those things that go into a live event. Well, that's what a trade show is. So when I looked at this sports academy, I really felt it was similar models. We had to transition that academy into a player development model. We ultimately were developing it was content, curriculums, and a player development model where we had to manage coaches, athletes, right from the youth sports up into the pro level, and yet we were also doing events, tournaments, national tournaments where teams would come in and compete. So it had a lot of similarities from a modeling standpoint, right? So the science of that modeling was there, if you will. And I always say there's a science and an art. You got to adjust things to the art for what fits in that situation. And I haven't failed because I've taken a science that has worked somewhere and tried to implement it exactly the way it works somewhere else. And that doesn't work. So in one sense, I saw a lot of the modeling, right? Okay. In the other sense, Josh, I would say the same is every business, in my opinion, and I say this from what others teach, and I've experienced that it works. There's two ways to look at a business. There is your life cycle of every business is the same, okay? And you go from startup, you go to growth, you go to maturity, okay, where you either end up being, you either make some adjustments at that point, and then you either continue to grow or you ultimately have to reinvent because you decline. And that's where turnarounds come in, right? And then without getting further in depth in that, every product has that same life cycle, if that makes sense, right? And when companies in that stage start to grow, a company might hit that maturity phase, right? Where you got a lot of competition coming in, you're not growing as fast. But the way they keep growing, if they choose to, is the next product. So now you've got a portfolio of products, right? And that next product now is in that startup phase, right? And then that growth phase. So you have that same phase that for a business that same stage is a business is going through. But then as you add products, you have a portfolio of products that are transitioning through that same phase, right? Now, having said that, I see there are 5 phases of what the entrepreneur to enterprise pathway is. And they play themselves out in those stages that I just mentioned to you. If I had a whiteboard right now, I might outline this. So hopefully this is communicating through. But
absolutely,
but what you do is you go through those phases, and this is what's the same. Those things, and then the phases are you have the fit phase, right? Where it's okay, we're matching customer need to what I offer. Why is what I'm offer different? So you have that product market fit, right? Then you go into that phase where it's the stretch phase, which is growth, where it's like, okay, now we're running. No matter how many resources we have, you never have enough, right? Time, money, people, whatever that is. So you have that stretch phase, right? And then you go in and you have that that systems phase. We're now, okay, now we're growing. Now we got to get more efficient. We got to use our resources, as efficiently as we can. So you go into that systems phase. Then you go into that culture phase, where in the early stages, culture just happens because one or yourself or a few people are hiring people. So you get all the right kind of people, in theory, that you're bringing into the organization because you're touching it. But when you've grown, now all of a sudden, you've got to be more intentional about culture, right? Because more people are hiring people, you've got, and so there's just so many more things happening, and you the DNA in your culture, you want to keep it, but yet you sort of got to, you need to change, but you need to stay the same at the same time, right? So you got to hold on to the DNA of that culture. Okay, so you got to just be more intentional because things are going to change. And then that last phase is what I call the anticipation phase, which is you got to have one foot in the present, one foot in the future. You're dealing with today's challenges of running the business, but you always got to be ready for what's around the bend, right? And in that process, this phase plays itself out in all the phases, right? Because it's how do you deal with today but be ready for tomorrow? And that, quite frankly, is the challenge of all leadership, right? You can't get so buried in today, and you can't get so buried in tomorrow. You got to figure out how to balance one foot in today and one foot in the future. But those 5 phases I mentioned, guys, the way I look at it is they happen in sequence, but they don't, right? And they can happen over and over again. So at the highest level, for me, it's the same. What are the similarities between the businesses that the one where I started up and exited, the one where I bought a turnaround and exited? It's the same. If we talk about the next 20 businesses, in my view, it might be different on the art of how you do those things in an industry, right? Or in a particular business, but the science of it, it's like gravity. You throw that ball up, it's coming down. There are life cycles to your business and your products, and there are phases of that entrepreneur to enterprise pathway that I have found they are all the same. And the art of the way you apply them has to do with a particular niche, a particular industry, a particular type of business.
That was amazing. Thank you. That was so well structured, and you brought the whole thing together. That was awesome. I'd love to hear more about in those phases. You had mentioned the each phase essentially implies the goal. But I feel like, and I know personally, entrepreneurs struggle with what to focus on in those specific stages, because being inside the business, even if you're trying to work on the business, you may have a view of you're potentially in a different phase than you're actually in. You may be worrying about stabilization, or you may be worried about growth when you haven't figured out product market fit, or you may be worried about systems and processes where you haven't figured out how you're going to grow. So what have you seen? And the answer is this in any way that, because you're providing absolute amazing value in all of your answers, answer in the way that you think is best. But essentially, how do you help entrepreneurs understand where they are and where their focus actually should be as part of what you do?
Another really great question, Alex. I guess there's a lot of different ways to come at it, right? And so much is sort of doing that diagnosing things in the first place, right? And it's first of all, you look at a manufacturing business and a service business, 2 different things. Okay. And I'll be perfectly honest. Most of my experience is in service businesses. I don't have a lot of in-depth experiences in a manufacturing business. Okay. But they're the same in the sense of, it's sort of revenue levels, is the first way to look at your stages, right? And, one way to look at it is, if you had two lines, like this, this one going up is sort of your revenue level. And then it's your infrastructure, right? And what starts to happen when you're growing, okay, you're starting up, you're naturally focused on what is, what's my customer need? I mean, you better figure that out, or you're not getting to the next stage, right? So that product market fit is a lot easier when you're at that stage, right? Okay, and then as you go through the stretch phase, what starts to happen is, depending on the business, but in a service business, a rule of thumb, and this is just, again, the science and the art, a rule of thumb, if you've not got the right systems in there, by the time you hit 20, 30 million, okay, 20 million, just pick a number, okay? But again, follow me directionally. You get to a point where you can't scale the hustle, right? Okay, so you're getting a lot of growing pains, and growing pains sort of like you're always putting out fires, all of a sudden meetings, there's no follow-ups in meetings, you walk into a meeting and you walk out and nothing happens, there's enough people in the organization right now that all of a sudden they don't really know what their role is, okay? Because it's just, it's not about just whatever it takes anymore and just go out there and get it done, right? So that tells you, that revenue axis and that infrastructure one, instead of it like maybe going like this, it's starting to go like this, okay? And there's a big gap between revenue growth and that infrastructure development. That's one of the first signs, right, that you're really starting to you've outgrown that fit stage. And I think instinct tell you that, right? Because but in that stretch phase, it's really starting to tell you, I'm outgrowing I'm outgrowing things. I'm a little behind in my systems, right? And then what starts to happen there, and what I try to focus on with leaders, and I remember focusing on it with myself, and I was really late to the party, and it was painful, okay? It's like that doer to leader or manager stage, right? Where everyone starts throwing the systems at you, Alex, right? And we three of us may have talked about this before, but, everybody focuses on the systems, but there's the mental side of making the transition from doer to manager. Because even if you don't know what all the answers are, none of us do, right? Just like parenting, back to that analogy earlier. Hey, I got two kids. The second one was just as challenging as the first one. What do? You just get in there and you figure it out, right? And so in a business, no matter how much you know, I don't have all the answers, even though I've done it like Groundhog's Day. Remember that old movie years ago? I get up every morning. It's like doing the same thing over and over. It's like Groundhog's Day, but it's still different, right? And if you can overcome the mental challenges, you'll find your way, and you'll also access people that have been where you want to go that'll help you find your way, all right? But what I mean by the three things is what I try to help leaders in identifying where they're at. Some of it, hopefully I'm giving you some of those clues, okay? But also it's like, you don't have to be alone, number one. There's people out there that can help you. And number two, it's like, there are three things that I think prevent leaders from really identifying what they have to do or even where they're at, okay? And it's the one core thing is the thing that got us here is not going to get us there, okay? You're going to have to keep changing that. And then the other pieces are, we're all lying if in some way we're not impacted by this, because the way we're wired as human beings, we manage it better. But at some level, this plays out. One is our identity. What does our identity come from? Right? Our identity comes from doing, things, right? What we accomplish. And if you really want to lead that business and find your way through those cycles and build that pathway that we talked about, if your identity comes from doing, your head's never going to be up enough, okay? Because you're going to keep doing, even if somebody gives you the best systems in the world. The other thing is, if you're a control freak, I was and still am a control freak, okay? But I learned to manage that, if you will, right? So you're controlling things, and we might do it for different reasons, right? But and then that other thing is a need for validation. We all like to be liked. We all, depends on who we're talking with or whatever it is, but that need for validation. And those three things, the mental game of playing with those, and when I mean playing with them, adjusting the mental game inside of us, ultimately say whether you make that transition from doer to getting things done yourself to getting things done through other people. And at that stretch systems phase, you better be making that personal transition, or you're going to become that bottleneck, and your business is not going to grow. And you're going to feel the pain of that. I woke up one day and I was angry at all the people around me. And I said, what the heck is going on? And I had to look in the mirror because I wasn't letting them step up, because I still got a lot of joy and enjoyment out of doing it myself. And let's face it, if somebody's sitting there saying, hey, he's going to do it himself, why should we worry about it? We're conditioning them, right? So anyway, so what I try to do and answer to the core answer to your question is, I try to help leaders understand the life cycle, understand the phases, understand who they have to be at each of those phases, okay? And now, quite frankly, most of them are smart people. They can, they can see that. Then they just maybe need to lean on somebody that's been where they're going that can help them get from A to B faster. Why should they fight with the same learning curve where they can reduce the learning curve if someone can help them work their way through? Make sense, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've done a good amount of these episodes, and you start to hear some things be similar across successful people. And the one that I'm pulling out here is what got me here won't get me there. It's something that we brought up on the show before, and I think it just proves. I don't know. The note that I actually wrote is like, does it make sense to just take a lot of these episodes and start writing a book on how to build an agency, how to build a business and everything? Because you do start to hear similar things from successful people. So, but where I think all of this is leading, again, based on what you've been saying and based on this chronological thing that we have going on, the book, Obstacles to Opportunity, Transforming Business Challenges into Triumphs. I think you've been pulling a lot from that book, but just to now kind of hone everything in and bring that book to light. And actually, before we jump into the book's contents, I guess, what made you want to write a book?
Couple of things. One, I remember the challenges in the trade show business. Okay. When we were going through it, my partner and I would look at one another and we'd say, we might not believe this someday. We got to write a book. And we joked to one another, okay? And we were both very much learners, okay? If you will. I always start out with things and say, I don't know what I don't know. And that's the way I start out with things, okay? Because no matter how many times we've been on a journey, it's like going to a movie. I don't know with you guys. I go to a movie. I can see a movie 2 or 3 times. And one of the reasons I walk out, my wife always looks at me like she hits me across the head because I don't remember who was in it. I don't remember the name of it. Okay, but I remember different things from the movie. But I keep watching it. I go back and watch it. I never saw that. Right?
I'm the same. Yeah.
Right. But we can go to that movie and you get something different every time. Right. Yeah. So if we're arrogant enough to think. Okay, and I say this in all respect for anyone else, but I don't want to be arrogant and think I know it all. So I start with I don't know what I don't know, okay? And as we were going through the trade show stuff, that was really a challenging business because we were not only building a business, but we were in the early stages. And this is not about our war stories, because I promise I won't get into those stories. Okay. But, we had competitors much larger were trying to put us out of business because it was that stage of the business. Many of them became friends down the road, okay? But we were battling a lot of things because we were stealing market share from traditional competitors. That's how early our growth phases were in that industry. So my partner and I said, we got to write a book someday. So, and then fast forward, all right, when I look at all my journey from there, okay, as well as other things I've done and tying it into, what I say today to people, find somebody, forget whether it's me or find somebody that's been where you're going, right? All right. And that's been my journey. Okay. So I can honestly say people showed up, guys, when I wasn't even looking for them, or they showed up because I always had this mindset of what's next. Okay, what are we doing now, but what's next? And I didn't know what the hell was next a lot of times. So I was consciously trying to look for someone. So they either just showed up or I was able to find somebody. But I can honestly tell you that whatever my level of success has been, okay, it would not be whatever level of success it's been without all of those people along the way. Okay. And I bet my house, I bet my family on that. That's how much I believe in that. Right. So, and I don't bet my family on anything. Okay. So in that, the reason I wanted to write the book is that I guess I got at the stage of my career right now where my definition long ago changed from what I do for success and how I can help others be successful, right? And that's a lot of what I think you guys try to do, even with your podcast. You're trying to connect people. But for me, and then I'll close down on this, Josh, it was how do I create my journey in a book? So if you were to read my book, okay, I have a bookend stuff of some things I've learned. I love process. I love frameworks. Okay. And I have a lot of that up front in my philosophy. And then I close the book. But in the core of that book is 20 some people that some friends, some I worked with, some just, agreed to talk to me, where we talked. And just like you alluded to earlier about, writing a book and putting it all together, I was able to take all their insights and put it in the book. So that someone can, I hope, pick up the book and have access to people that have been where they're going and to make it easy on them because they don't have to be alone. Does that make sense, Josh?
It does, and I actually think it makes a great model for a book. 99% of the time I'm bringing someone up, it's Tim Ferriss, but he wrote Tools of Titan, and it's very similar. It's literally each chapter is about 2 pages, and it's just 5 questions that he had his guests answer about how they were successful. So I think and actually even Ryan Holiday, a lot of his books is an interesting style where each chapter has a point, but he's bringing in someone's story. So he's not interviewing, he's not directly talking to someone, but he's bringing in a specific story to kind of hammer down that point. So I love that. Just because we have short time, the last question I do want to ask is, who do you think should be picking up the book?
We've really talked about it, right? If you want to move your career along, if you want to, and quite frankly, the most important thing is, what are you doing to tackle challenges for your company, whether you own it or you're working within a company, right? And you have your personal aspirations of whether you're whether you're an aspiring leader, whether you're an early stage leader, or you're a seasoned leader, okay? I think there are a lot of great tips in there, a lot of great insights on the journey, okay, of tackling challenges at different stages of any business, okay? And so, as long as you're not someone, and I say this in all due respect, that think maybe you know it all, okay? Because I sure as heck don't. There's a lot of things I wish I had put in the book that we haven't. I think you're going to find something there. And without overplugging the book, I've had people say to me they need a highlighter, okay? Because we try to have the right context and tie it all together, but there's so many tips in that thing that you can, that I think will apply to your real world situation. So I think if you're on that journey in business and you want to figure out how to get unstuck and tackle some challenges, I think there's universal insights in that. And it's not all about me. It's about a lot of really interesting, successful leaders that, okay, there may be some of them aren't on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, but quite frankly, they've got some great stories that we just wanted to highlight.
I think, like you mentioned, I think that's exactly what we're trying to do with this podcast too. And that's why I think we get so much out of it. Hopefully, the listeners get so much out of it. But I think when you start to turn it, into Alex and I trying to learn from our guests, I think it just helps everyone. So thank you, I guess, for putting out the book. And as we come up to the end of the episode, I just want to give you an opportunity to mention how people can find you and anything else you'd like to end with.
Well, thanks, Josh. I guess, the book is, of course, available on Amazon, and so just, that's there. My website is patalacqua.com, PATALACQUA. There's some free content on there. There's some online premium content, and if anybody would like to explore how maybe we could work together in some way, I allocate some personal time to where I can do some personalized services. And then LinkedIn is just, just look up my name on LinkedIn, and I like to interact. I'm not on all the social media sites, but I do spend some time on LinkedIn, and mainly because of the interaction. I love to talk to anyone about challenges they're having, and if I can add some value and learn from them at the same time. So, that I think that's sort of the way to reach me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And for those of you who have learned something new from this episode, please consider giving us a like or a follow so we can continue getting the highest quality of guests. And as always, thank you for listening. Pat, first, we love a good Philly, South Jersey accent, but this has honestly been one of the best episodes I think we've had. It's just every question, or every response that you gave was just like useful. Sometimes things go, I like when it goes off the rails a little bit, but maybe the listeners don't. And I think this just had literally 100% useful responses. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. I appreciate you both.
Thanks for listening to the Masters in Marketing Agency podcast. I hope you got a ton of value out of this episode. And before we go, I just want to thank our sponsors, DevNoodle. DevNoodle provides marketing agencies with the ability to offer their clients unlimited website design, build, and management services with fixed monthly plans. If website design, development, and maintenance is holding your agency back from growing, please reach out to us at devnoodle.com, where we make websites easy for you and easy for your clients. devnoodle.com.